Hello everyone, my name is Visit Vao-Soongnern from Thailand. It is my pleasure to join Poly-Char for the first time. Actually, there are three persons from my group to give a talk today, including two of my grad students. Today, I would like to share my research work in the title of a combined molecular dynamic simulation and synchrotron X-ray absorption spectroscopy, or MDXR, to characterize the atomistic local structure of ion-containing polymer. So actually, most of my work is about polymer simulation. So this presentation is quite special for me in that I try to present something based on experimental side. Okay. Here is the outline of my talk today. First of all, I will introduce you about the polymer electrolytes and synchrotron X-ray absorption spectroscopy and why we have to use this facility to characterize this sample. Then I will introduce the concept of molecular dynamic simulation to study polymer electrolyte in combination with the experiment, so-called the MDXR. Next, I'll give you our result and discussion on some polymer electrolyte, including PEO and PVA mixed with potassium and calcium thiocyanate salt. And finally, some remark and conclusion. Okay, about 15 years ago, we had the first beamline synchrotron at Thailand for X-ray absorption spectroscopy, which is located inside my university. Then I set up the project to combine my experience in molecular simulation with synchrotron X-ray. I found an interesting topic about polymer electrolyte, which is the complex between polymer and salt for battery application. We need to understand the relationship between atomistic nanostructure and ionic conductivity of the amorphous materials. So I got the research grant to work on this project for 3 years to study atomistic nanostructure of polymer electrolyte by exact and computational chemistry technique. Polymer electrolyte is actually the polymer dissolved with salt in it, and it can exhibit ionic mobilities. The suitable polymer should contain polar atom like oxygen in this case, or PO, which can coordinate with alkali ion perfectly, quite similar to cloud ether. In principle, the cation here should be lithium, but unfortunately, our synchrotron X-ray is not high enough for energy, so we changed lithium to potassium so that we can study it further. And the size of anion here should be big enough so that salt can completely to dissociate well in the polymer matrix. And the main application of this polymer electrolyte is about rechargeable batteries, and it has several advantages compared to the conventional battery, as listed here. There is a fundamental interest to understand more about the ionic conductivities, which is based on three key factors. First is the number of charge carrier, which is related to the ability of salt to dissociate. Second is about the ionic charge, mostly about +1 and -1. And the third, maybe the most important, is about the ionic mobility, which led to the movement of ion in the polymer matrix. So this cartoon is the proposed mechanism of how ion move in the polymer matrix. This is the intrachain and interchain hopping. The intrachain hopping is the way ion hop along the same polymer at the coordinate to the oxygen atom. So interchain means the hopping between the same chain, and interhopping is about the different chain. So sometimes the ion is not complete to dissociate, so they have some other mechanism that we call the cluster hopping, that the anion come close to the cation and they hop together. So my research effort is trying to shed some light on this mechanism by using MD simulation and XR to find the detailed observation structure of the polymer salt complex. So this is the objective of my work. We want to develop a combined method of molecular dynamic simulation and X-ray absorption spectroscopy to study about the atomistic solution structure of polymer electrolyte. MDXR is the result of our collaboration between myself at the university and to other nature labs. So I thank my colleague here too for our collaboration. Here are the system that we investigate for the oxygen-containing polymers. Actually, at first, I start from the most simple molecule to check the MDS method with salt solution with water, but the result will not present here. Anyway, the result when we compare with MN is quite good. So next, I study the tetragram molecule, which is the molecular analog to PO, but had only 4 units, so that MDS region can fully relax the structure completely. And then I study PVA, which have the oxygen in the side chain, which is opposite to the PO case that the oxygen in the backbone. So actually I have other 2 systems like PAA and PPO, but we have no time here to discuss about our result. So I just present 2 systems for PO and PVA here. So here is the cartoon of the typical exponent setup. The circle here represent the synchrotron storage ring which provide high energy X-ray. We use the monochromator to select a specific X-ray energies. The X-ray pass through this slit. The incident of X-ray and fluorescent X-ray intensity monitored using this ion chamber. We can also monitor the transmit X-ray intensity. The final X-ray intensity is proportional to the incident X-ray intensity but decreased exponentially with the thickness of the sample and its absorption coefficient mu E here. When the energy of the incident X-ray is increased, we found the oscillating pattern in the absorption spectrum compared to the smooth curve that come from the background. So this oscillation comes from the interference of the backscatter wave from the nearby atom. It contains the information such as type, number, distance, and disorder of the solution structure. So in general, this is the procedure for the exact data analysis which most of people do in the experiment. The first step is to obtain the raw data here. And the second step here, we do the pre-edge and post-edge adjustment followed by background subtraction so that we can get this picture. And then we define the chi-e function here, which is the oscillating signal subtract by the background signal and edge jump. Okay. Third step is we change the x-axis from the energy E to the wave vector K. And in order to pronounce the signal at the higher K, we multiply the y-axis by K squared normally. And the final step, we do Fourier transform to convert exact data from K space to R space. The final picture can give information about the solution structure and can be compared with the MD simulation. So this is how exact data can be interpreted by fitting to the equation derived from the theory of single scattering. As you can see, there are 4 main parameters that we can obtain from exact that we label here. The first is about the distance R. This is the distance from the surrounded atom to the probe atom, as shown in this figure. Second is number of atoms that surrounded atom that can show in the peak area here also. So this is the number of surrounded atom. The third is about the type of atom. This is surrounded of the probe atom. And the fourth information we can get is about the structure disorder. So that means the atom that can be arranged here can be vibration by thermal vibration or configuration disordering that occur in the amorphous material or non-crystalline material sample. So these 2 pictures show you how to interpret the exact data from the solution model. Okay. So as you can see from the previous slide, to fitting the data with many parameters is very difficult task. So normally people start from doing experiment from the sample preparation, then they go to the synchrotron to do exact measurement. After that, maybe they can go home and try to do data analysis by the fitting procedure. This is the most difficult problem to obtain the model to explain the experimental data, as most of the samples using XRF is amorphous or non-crystalline materials. In most cases, people use a model crystal, which has the closest structure to their system as the fitting model. However, for this polymer salt complex, it is very difficult, as polymer electrolyte sample is not only amorphous but it has very high degree of mobility because ion can diffuse, and polymer chain itself is quite mobile because the glass transition temperature of PEO is quite low, which is less than room temperature, so all the thing is very dynamic. So we then propose to construct the model using MD simulation and use several snapshots from MD trajectory to predict XRF spectrum, not the fitting like people in the experiment trying to do. The concept of MD-XRF is to generate the spectrum using the set of the select coordinate around the probe atom within the cutoff radius, normally around 6 to 7 angstrom. The Cartesian coordinate of this atom will be used as the input for the theoretical calculation from FEP program. Several independent spectrum will be ensemble averaged to predict the final XRF spectrum to compare with the one determined by experiment. Then direct comparison between the calculated and experimental XRF can be made to extract information about the detailed solution structure of polymer electrolyte, as shown here. As MD simulation is the key tool for this research, I would like to introduce the concept of MD simulation a little bit. MD actually is a technique to generate the trajectory of atom movement according to Newtonian equation of motion F equal to ma, as shown here. The new position of each atom can be estimated using a numerical technique. The force acting on each atom can be derived from the minus gradient of the potential energy derived from the force field. So force field is basically the simple form of mathematical function to represent the energetic for the molecules. For example, the bonded term, like bond stretching and bond bending, we use the quadratic term to simply represent how the energetic change upon stretching and bending, and we use the cosine function for bond torsion. The same group of the force field and non-bond interaction, we can use the Lennard-Jones potential function or the Coulombic interaction depend on the atomic charge. So this is our goal to use MD simulation. We want to predict the property of polymer electrolyte, for example, the solution structure and interaction between salt and polymer. We can use XRF to validate this step, especially the accuracy of the force field used in our system. Then we can use MD further to predict the ionic mobility and diffusion coefficients. In overall, we will be able to design new polymer structure and salt, which will be better electrolyte on computers before doing experiment in the future. This is my hope. As this work, we focus on the solution structure. We can derive this property directly from MD simulation by analyzing the radial distribution function RDF or GR. The idea of this RDF is to count the number density of the surrounding atom as a function of distance from the reference element. We can observe peak at the distance, and we can find most of the atom. For example, in this figure, we can see the first solution peak in the red color and second solution peak in the yellow color, which is denoted to this picture also. So we can also determine the number of the atom in this solution shell by integrating the area under this curve, and we will send this number as the quotient number of Cn, so we can obtain this information from MD simulation. The question why we choose potassium thiocyanate in our system, because we cannot probe lithium, as I mentioned earlier, that because our synchrotron in Thailand had energy is not high enough. Nevertheless, KCN is interesting, as we can see from literature, that when this salt is in the gas phase, as shown here, the quantum chemistry correlation predict that the structure which has the lowest energy is the bidentate structure. whereas KCN, when we complex in the crystalline phase, they have different structure like this, and the X-ray diffraction data for this structure say that potassium will be connected mostly with two thiocyanate anion at the nitrogen position. Then potassium is connected to 5 oxygen from PO. Anyway, we wonder if this structure is also true in the case of PO mixed with KCN in the amorphous phase, as our polymetallic sample will be in the amorphous phase. So this is our interest. Okay. We choose the tetragram molecule, which is just like the tetramer of PO to complex with KCN at the mole ratio 1 to 12, 1 to 20. The sample is actually in the liquid state. We then do X-sub experiment and MD simulation. Next, we compare the X-sub spectrum from experiment with the one generated from the MD trajectory, just like this picture. As you can see, the agreement is quite good both in K space and R space. So we can confirm that our MD simulation is reasonable, and we can use this MD trajectory to analyze further for other properties, especially the solvation structure. From the RDF of MD simulation, we can extract the distance and number of atoms around the potassium ion. For the first solution shell, by average, there are 3 oxygen atoms from one polymer and 2 thiocyanate anion in the bidentate structure, as just like this picture to show here 2 bidentate coordinate from thiocyanate in the first solution shell. Actually, there will be some case that is minor case that 2 or 4 oxygen to solvate by 2 molecules of tetragram molecule based on our statistic analysis as shown in this picture. So the structure we obtain here is quite different from the one shown previously in the case of crystalline phase. We also vary the OM ratio, but the results are quite similar. So that means the covalent shell is independent from the concentration of salt that is mixed in the polymer. Next, we investigate the chain properties. We observe slightly contraction of chain shape upon complexation with salt, as seen from the mean square radius gyration at this picture. This is because the bond adopt less trans conformation, especially at the CO bond, so that the oxygen can connect with potassium better. So most of the population of conformation triad are decreased upon complexation with salt, except TGT and TGG conformation. So in general pictures, polymer chain adopt more compact conformation in order to complex with the salt. Next, I'd like to move to another case when oxygen is located at the side chain. Here we choose polyvinyl alcohol or PVA. We also puzzle if the anion can be solved, like in the case of PEO. So we choose to solve with different anion. We choose calcium to see the effect of cation valency such that they can interact stronger to the anion and polymer. In fact, we also did the potassium with PVA, but we just show the result for calcium here. Okay. For the first system, we vary the amount of salt with different oxygen and calcium ratio. The X-sub spectrum for all these conditions were similar for both frequency and amplitude at all K range. So this indicates that the neighbor atoms are the same element and the number of neighbor atoms is nearly independent from the salt concentration. For calcium salt with twin anion, as shown here, we observe no difference for the spectra. So we can say that the anion may not be located in the solvation shell, unlike this case for the PO case, that anion come to coordinate with with the cation. But in this case, like as the PVA, it seems to us that the anion cannot come to Soviet. We then compare the experimental and calculate extra spectrum. Both two curves are in good agreement for frequency and fair agreement for the amplitude. Okay. From this RDF, we can say that chloride ion will not come to coordinate with calcium ion, as the coordinate number is only 0.25. Only oxygen from polymer can solve calcium. There are around 7 oxygen atoms to coordinate with the calcium. So we analyze the statistic further. The coordinate number of oxygen around the calcium ion in the first 7 shell within about 2.75 angstrom are varied from 6 to 8, mostly come from 3 to 4 PVA chain. The case of 7 oxygen atom for 3 PVA chain related to calcium is the most frequently observed. The representative model for calcium ion solvate, the PVA matrix, is given in the right figure. The calcium ion was wrapped by 7 oxygen atoms from 3 different PVA chains. So in the case of population for both gold plus and gold minus conformation, both of them are slightly increased, around 3 to 4% relative to those of unmixed PVA, while the trans state slightly decreased about 7%. So this indicates that the Coulombic interaction between calcium ion and oxygen tend to pull segments of the chain together to adopt more gold conformation in the backbone. So summary and outlook. The FDXR method was developed to study atomistic solution structure of polymer salt complex, and we studied the effect of effect of type of cation anion and some oxygen-containing polymer were studied. The MD trajectory were used to generate the simulated extra spectrum, which were in very good agreement with experimental measurement. And the detailed structure parameter of ionic solution structure can be obtained. However, I would like to remark a little bit that if we want to correctly calculate the biovolume factors, which is composed of both thermal and spatial disorder, we need to employ quantum chemistry calculator to estimate the thermal vibration using the cluster model. And we will try this thing in the future, I hope. And the accuracy of force field is very important to get the better swim result. And finally, I would like to thank my former student who participated in this project, Dr. Chitiman. Now she works at VU Vong-Churikul University, Keson Mevat at the 101 คงวิปัสสินอกแอปมหาสารคาม and Chinawut Pipat Padakun at Burapha University. And finally, I hope that I can illustrate some concept about the combination of simulation and experiment, trying to give something about the information of the microstructure of polymeric material. And finally, I would like to thank for your all attention. Thank you so much.